Hello, my name is Abdul McWhorter. I work with GRF CPAs and advisors. Today we'll be talking about accounts payables in Acumatica ERP. And so today's agenda, we will go over how to create a vendor. Next, we'll go over how to create an AP bill. We'll then go over how to release the AP bill. We'll review the general ledger badge that the system generates as a result. We'll then go over paying AP bills. We'll go over that manually, and then we'll also pay multiple bills at one time. We'll take a look at how to correct AP bills. And the two ways you do that is either a debit adjustment or a credit adjustment. And lastly, we'll take a look at processing prepayments. Okay, so with that being said, let's go ahead and open up Acumatica. And most of our work today will be done in the payables workspace. So the first thing we'll do, as we talked about, is we'll go over how to create a vendor. So there's a few things we'll talk about once again. The one thing is how to create a new vendor, and we're going to base that on vendor class. And secondly, we'll review the default settings that the system inserts from the vendor class. So, of course, knowing to set up a vendor is very important, right? As business progresses, we meet new vendors. We want to make sure we set them up correctly, and then also making sure that we set up any terms that we receive correctly, and make sure due dates and things like that are in the system for Acumatica to help us recognize due dates, discounts, different things like that. So that being said, what the scenario is, we have a new company called the Cleanup Company. They've agreed to sell us their services. Their terms will be payments are due in 30 days. They'll give us a 3% discount if the services are paid within the first 10 days. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and set them up. So the first thing you'll do, of course, from the payables workspace, let's just go back. So we were starting, so we're in the payables workspace under profiles. There you see vendors. To the right, we'll select add a new record. And so the new records form, the vendors form opens. Here we are. So in the vendor ID, we'll type in the name. And this is cleanup. Status is active. Vendor class we'll keep as default. Um, and let's see, we got everything specified. And so then we'll come down here under the general tab in the account info portion of the vendor form. We'll also put cleanup as the name that the system will show. And from there, we will save. And that is the first portion of setting up a vendor. Actually, at this point, if we wanted to process anything, we can do it now. The vendor is set up in Acumatica. But of course, you want to have more information, right? Primary contact, things like that. But I want to just show you something. Well, we won't go there. So let's just continue on where we are here. So the next thing is we'll specify the vendor contact, the primary contact information. And to do that, under the primary contact section of the general tab, we'll enter as much And in most cases, enter as much information as as you have. Definitely going to want to have your primary contact person, so on and so forth. Um, and in this case, let's just go ahead and fill out ours so we can continue on. Call this the salesperson. Email, let's say Jane at cleanup.com. 310. Uh, thing. And so we've gotten all the primary contact information in the primary contact portion of the general tab. And so at this point, we'll save it. And so now we have the vendor set up. We specified the vendor's contact information. And actually, let's just keep going here. And the next thing, and so, oh, can't forget about this very important part, right? 1532 Green Street. And let's just say Los Angeles, California. Nine oh two. Oh, and let's save that. And so we have our vendor set up, primary contact information set up. And so now let's go ahead and set up our terms. And initially we said this vendor offered us 30 days. Our payments are due in 30 days. They will allow us a 3% discount if we pay any invoice within the first 10 days of occurring of in the first 10 days of the contract. So with that being said, let's go ahead and under the financial settings portion of the financial tab, we'll click the magnifying glass, and there you have the terms that we'd like to add. These are the exact terms that the vendor offered us, which is 3%, 10 days, net 30. So let's select that. Currency type, and we pay in US dollars. So, and we'll continue to the payment tab, and under the payment tab, um, we'll set up the default payment method setting. So here we do pay by check, but in case if company paid by something other than check, which may be ACH or wire transfer, you can select that there. Also with the cash account, you can change the cash account in this screen here, and we'll pay by discount date. So you can either select due date or discount date. In this case, we'll pay by discount date. Our payment lead time will be 3. And in this case, if you'd like to, or there's an agreement, that you pay separately by invoice separately, or by line on the invoice, if that is an agreement, you can select it here, and Acumatica will process. In this case, if we selected pay separately, each invoice that we occurred with this vendor would be paid separately. In the case that we had, say, more than one open invoice for this vendor, but in this case, we won't select that. Just wanted to give you a quick view of what these two options here were. Okay, so then we'll go over to GL accounts, and we'll take a look at the general ledger accounts that'll be affected. Of course, this will be our main accounts payable, expense account, discount account. Uh, and these can be changed if these accounts, if you'd like to change these accounts. But in this case, these are defaulted, meaning from vendor class, these are the accounts that this vendor, this is how we usually, the accounts that are usually affected by this kind of vendor. Uh, okay. And so with that being said, once again, we've set up our financial terms here under financial settings, under the financial tab. Terms is our a 3% discount. I've paid in first 10 days, net 30. Uh, current ID, currency ID in this case, we pay by US dollar. Under the payments tab, we have our default payment settings. We pay by check. Our we viewed our cash account, make sure that is correct. We pay by discount date, so we have everything set up the way we'd like to see it. So at this point, we would save it. And there you have it. Um, we went through the process of creating a vendor. So we created a vendor and we specified the contact information, the financial settings, and payment settings. We also reviewed the general ledger accounts that the system inserted by default in that new vendor's record. So if you took a look at it, of course, we went over our accounts payable. So on the general ledger tab, we took a look at the defaulted general ledger accounts that would be affected by that vendor. Okay. So continuing to move on, we've created a vendor. And so now let's go ahead and create an AP bill to see how that process works. So moving right back into Acumatica, we'll start again from our payables workspace, excuse me, under transactions, bills needed to be paid. In this case, in most coming out of the box, Acumatica, this is a bills and adjustment form. But it can be configured to say anything, to call it anything you'd like to help you remember it. But in that case, we'll select the new bill and adjustments form. And you see here the bill and adjustment form opens. This is a bill, so first thing is we're processing it. You have to select what type of bill and adjustment this will be. And you have a couple of other selections, but in this case, this type is bill. We'll select the vendor. And in this case, we'll select, because we're going to buy some office supplies. And Spectra Stationary Office, but their vendor ID is Stat Office. This is what we want to select. Excuse me. And so we have the date here that we're going to purchase um, the items. Post period is correct. Vendor reference. We'll call this office supplies. Okay. In the description, office supplies. And then we'll come down to the details tab and we will select add row. You see here, because we're in the the company that we're in, it automatically defaults to that company. But if you wanted to change one company, the branch that this bill was affecting, you could. In this case, we'll keep it here. Transaction description will be office supplies. Extended cost, we'll say $100. And in this case, if you wanted to change the account, because you had a different account, you wanted to change it. But of course, this is the defaulted account that the bills and adjustments defaults to. So here, you see, office expense, supplies, different things. And in this case, because they're office supplies, we'll select supplies. Project Code X, which is basically a non, and let's just open it so you can take a look. A non-project code, so it's not connected to any of these projects. This is just a standalone bill for this vendor. So let's continue. Okay, and so then we'll save it. And it has the on hold status. We've taken a look at it, of course. We've entered all the information, everything is correct. So at this point, and keep in mind also if you wanted to attach any files, anything like that, you can add that in this process. But with that being said, we'll remove the hold. And if you see it went from on hold to balance, the status changed. And so at this point, we know we have the item, so we'll release it. And so now the bill is available to pay. Okay. And so we just went through the process of course, creating the AP bill. We went through, took a look at how the status has changed from on hold to balance to now open and being available for pay. And so at that point, um, we'll assume we're in the future and we want to pay this bill. Okay. So matter of fact, let's just go back to, no, we won't go back to where so we're going to pay the bill. So in this case, no, let's go back because I want to review the and I have a filter on, so we'll clear these filters. And here's the bill we just created. And before we move forward, there are some things I just want to take a look at. Have us take a look at. So we've created it, we've released the bill, and let's just go to the financial tab. And we want to take a look at the batch number and the, so before we go further, what are we doing here? We're going to review the general ledger batch that the system generated as a result of us releasing the bill for pay. So to do that from the original, and we're on the bill and adjustment screen, but what we did was come to the financial tab. So initially, this is how the screen looked from the detail tab. So to review the general ledger batch, we'll come to the financials detail tab. Under links to general ledger, next to batch number, you see the system provides a hyperlinked batch number. So you'll click that. And this opens the journal transactions form, and we are able to take a look at the actual journal transaction that was posted to the accounts payable subledger. Okay, and in this case, you'll take a look at accounts payable was credited, and which is correct in this case, right? Because we incurred accounts payable here, so we incurred a new liability, so that is correct. That increased, and we did receive our supplies, and so here we have the debit to supplies to our asset there. So let's go ahead and close the journal transactions form. And now we'll move into the to the next process of paying an AP bill. So before we do that, I'd like to take a look at where I'm at and make sure, of course, we go over where we've been. So in that process, just To reiterate it, we created and released an AP bill, and we then reviewed the general ledger transaction that the system generated on the release of that AP bill. And so now we'll move into the process of go ahead and pay the bill that we just created. Okay. And so let's just dive back into Acumatica. And from our payable screen, and we're going to pay a bill, of course. Scenario is, sometime in the future, and let's just say 7 days later, we're paying bills, and we have this $100 bill for supplies that we incurred a week ago, and we want to get that thing paid. So in this case, we'll go to from our payable screen under transactions, checks and payments. Okay. And we'll add a new record because we want to create a new check in this case. This is the checks and payments form that is open when you create a new record. In this case, this is a type. There's other types of checks and payments that we can process. But in this case, we'll use a check and payment. We'll look for our vendor. And in this case, it's Stat Office Actra. There we have it. So once we select our vendor, of course, Acumatica populates all the other defaulted items of the check and payments form. And let's just go ahead and flow through. And so our payment amount, in this case, we want to pay $100. Okay. And so you see a line was added to our documents to apply tab. And so we'll come down to the document type. And of course, we're going to be applying this payment to a bill. Of course, there's other options. Just wanted to show you what those options are. And under reference number, if you have the reference number to the invoice or the AP bill you'd like to pay, you can definitely type it in, or you can go through the search bar. And in this case, there we are. That's our open bill we want to pay. So we'll select it. System automatically then populates the line. So the amount to be paid is the payment amount. And of course, if you wanted to change that, if there were other bills or lines you were going to add to this check and payment, there was only a portion you wanted to pay toward this bill, you could, but in this case, we won't. So we'll continue through. See the system populates due date, all of the other things. And then I'll save it. And then we'll remove the hold. And you see the status changed from on hold to pending print. So we have this, we've processed it so far. We've created the check so far. So that's where we are here. We went through the process of creating the check, payment amount, populating the line and the items to be paid. And so now we'll go into the process of printing the check. And so here on the checks and payments toolbar, under print and process, we'll select print process. And the system then opens the process payments process payment / print checks form. And you see the system automatically selects the check here that we want that we're processing. It also automatically populates the payment method and cash account. Of course, these items can be changed. That's what need be. It also provides a reference number. Let's just click it. That takes us back to the previous form that was the checks and payments form. And if we want it, we can continue to drill back to our original bills and adjustment form here. So we have a link in every form, all the way that connects us to the source document in this case. So we have the process payments and prints checks form open. So we'll review everything. We took a look at payment amount, everything is correct. And so then we'll process. The system opens the check print form to give us a view of the check that's going to be printed. Of course, we take a look at everything and view it. And once we close it, the system then takes us to the release payments form, and it automatically here selects the check that we're processing. And that's important, of course, in the case that you may have other checks, you're doing a check run or whatever the case may be. It's just a good tool to help you from, having to remember what check or in most cases. So, but automatically selects the check, gives us all the information. We then review the information, of course, and everything is correct. We'll select process. System opens the processing dialog box. Of course, we see the green check mark that tells us that this process was happened completely. We'll close it. Okay, and so let's just exit out of here. We'll go back to the payments, payables tab. And so what we want to do here is take a look at, so we want to take a look at the check that we just created. So on that, we'll go to the checks and payments summary form. We'll select there, and there you see which is the last check that we created, and there we have a check number, reference number, excuse me, check type status, the reference number, the status of this check, and all the other information. And of course, if you wanted more information into this check, you can drill into it. And there you have it. Okay, so we'll go back to our payables workspace, and let's just take a brief recap on where we are here. So we just went over the process of paying an AP bill. So we created a check and then we applied it to the AP bill that had to be paid by this check. We removed the check from hold, we printed it and then reviewed it. We released the check and then we reviewed. No, we didn't. So let's just do that before we move on. And that's a good reason for me to always take a recap of where I've been. So before we go any further, let's take a look at that. So checks and payments. And let's go into the check that we just created. Let's take a look at the financial tab under the general ledger link, and let's take a look at the AP batch that was created. So now we have the journal transactions form that was open, and we take a look and we see what accounts were affected. In this case, this is correct, right? We paid a bill, so we see a credit or a deduction from our checking account. And then we also know that we paid a bill. So this was the same accounts payable bill that we just created. So we'll reduce the amounts of our payable. And there we see it. And of course, the accounts that were affected. Okay, so let's go ahead and close this out. And now let's go back to our recap. And now we released the check and we reviewed the general ledger transaction that was generated by the system. And so let's just continue to move forward. The next item we'll talk about is how to pay multiple bills in Acumatica. Okay, so with that being said, let's just go ahead and jump back into Acumatica, start from our payables workspace. And in this case, quick scenario, we have actually we'll be working with two vendors in this case. One of our vendors, Jarco, we have three bills that are open with them, and we're going to create a payment to pay all three of those invoices. And then we also have a vendor, which in this case is our vendor Front Source, and we have two bills from them, but those bills should be paid separately, so two separate checks. And so in this case, let's just look, and we'll change our business date to February 6th. Okay, so let's go back to our payables workspace. And so in this process, we'll select payables. Under the processes, we'll go to prepare payments. And the prepare payments form opens. And so from here, we're going to, set up the payments like we said. So the first thing we'll do is, and the system automatically populates the branch. But of course, if you have multiple companies and you wanted to process payments for other branches, in this case, you could, but we'll stay here at our head office, select the payment method. Of course, once again, you have all of these options. For us, we pay by check. And because we pay by check, system automatically defaults our cash account and all of the other items that are open, and we want to pay by check. Okay. And so, of course, our payment date is today. Post period is correct. We'll leave vendor class open in vendor because we want to search by these parameters here. And so in this case, we'll say pay date within the last 8 days. System regenerates. And keep in mind, this would be the process as opposed to come to look for, invoice by invoice. You can definitely come into the prepare payments form and set up parameters where, of course, here we can search by, if we want to, if bills are due within the next 8 days, right? If they fall in that parameter, we can find them. But if there was a due date within a number of days, or so on and so forth, right? And pretty self-explanatory. But we're going to select pay date within 8 days. Okay. And so with that being said, we take a look and we see the three bills, and in this case, the three bills for our vendor Jarco that we intend to pay. One is $45.50. The second will be $207. And lastly will be $173.50. So here are the three invoices that we want to pay. So we'll go ahead and select those. And then next we have a vendor Front Source, and they have two bills, but these bills are to be paid separately. And so if you can see here, here is the vendor Front Source, and in Acumatica, they were already pre-selected to be paid separately. So you see the system automatically had paid separately selected for these invoices. So in this case, these are, of course, the two that we'd like to select. So we'll go ahead and select those two invoices. And then here at the top, you see once we make our selection in the summary area of the prepare payments form, it gives us the selection total of $641 and the number of rows that make up the total of that selection total. Okay. And so with that being said, we have everything. We'll go ahead and process. And just keep in mind, there's process and process all. And if you select process all, of course, it will just simply process all of them. without a checkbox or anything. It will just process the whole thing. So I just say that to say, before clicking to test that, just know that process all actually means process all. So, but anyway, let's continue to move. So process dialog box opens, and then, oh wow, don't know what that means, but we'll continue on. And the process payment print check forms opens, and I'll review that in just a moment offline, but we continue to move forward with the processing of the payment, because this is actually without that pop-up that just happened, uh, in the normal process of things, the process payments and print checks form would have opened as it did in this case. And it would have opened with the three checks selected. And if you see what these checks are, there's one check for $426 to pay the amount of the three invoices that we selected. And then there's two separate checks, which are check number 39 and 40, that of course will pay the remaining front source invoices separately as we select it. You see the selection total is the same, $641, with three separate payments. And so at that point, as we reviewed it and we've concluded that everything is correct, we'll process the check remittance forms open, and of course gives us a view of how each check will look. So here's our JARCO check. You can see everything is detailed by line uh, here. Then this will be the second check, and this will be our third check for front source. So the two separate checks. So let's go ahead and close that out. System, of course, opens the release payments form with those three checks that we just processed, and so they're selected. And so we'll go ahead and process these three payments. Take a look at the process and dialog box. And theme here is, once you see the green, you'll kind of know that the green check boxes are the green check marks signifying that they processed successfully. So let's close it. And let's just go back to checks and payments. And let's take a look at, so here we have our three. So we came back to payables under the checks and payments form to take a look at the status of the three checks that we've just created. So you see here, three checks for one for JARCO, two for front source. If we'd like to, let's go ahead and review the general ledger batch. So, excuse me, for JARCO under the financial, next to batch number under the general ledger link, let's select the hyperlink. And so you'll see here in the journal transaction, the effect to the AP sub ledger. And there you have it, reduction to our cash because we paid a bill, reduction to our payables because this was a payable. So there you have the accounts that were affected. Let's go ahead and close that. And of course, if we wanted to say this, see the same information for front source, come under financial, take a look at that journal transaction where we have the reduction to cash, reduction to that payable. Okay. And so let's just jump back in and see where we're at. So what we went over here, we're paying multiple bills with Acumatica. We searched for 5 bills that had to be paid with one payment. We then prepared 3 checks. Of course, one check for Jarco paid 3 bills to one vendor, and the other 2 checks paid 2 separate bills to the remaining vendor. In that case, in this case, was Front Source. We released the payments and verified that the needed bills had been applied to each of the payments. And then lastly, we reviewed the general ledger batch generated by the system for all of the separate checks. Okay, so let's just continue moving. And so the next topic we'll cover here will be, let's jump back in Acumatica, we'll be correcting AP bills. And there's 2 ways, of course, we talked about in the beginning how to correct AP bills would be either through a credit adjustment or a debit adjustment. And so the first portion here we'll talk about is how to create and release a debit adjustment. And then we'll apply the debit adjustment to an AP bill. So in this case, let's say February 11th, we received a credit memo from Spectra Stationery, and they've given us a $10 discount that we can apply to any bill that we have for Spectra. So we'll need to process the vendor's credit memo as a debit adjustment, and that will reduce the outstanding balance that we owe to this vendor. So once again, so when we receive a credit memo, we create a debit adjustment. Okay, so let's just go ahead and move into that. And how would you go about doing that? The first thing, from the payables workspace under transactions, bills that need to be paid, we'll open a new bill and adjustments form under type. This bill and adjustment will be a debit adjustment. And let's get the date. So we said we received it on February 11th. Let's actually just go ahead and move the business date there. Yes, we'll start over. So there we have, we're on February 11th. This is the day we said we received the credit memo. So type debit adjustment. Date is correct. In the vendor reference, we'll put credit memo. The vendor, let's go ahead and search. We said it's stat office. There we have. Okay. And so what's the description here? We're going to say, as far as credit memo received, and let's see here. And then, okay, we have all this. Let's come down to the details tab. We'll add a row. And the description will be credit memo received. So that's going to be our transaction description. And the extended cost in this case is going to be $10. And we're going to select supplies because that's where our original invoice was created. Project code X, which is a non-project code. So basically a standalone, not attached to any project. Okay. So then we'll save, and we've created our, credit memo or debit adjustment. In this case, we received a credit memo from a customer, and it becomes a debit adjustment in our system that we'll use to decrease the amount owed to the particular vendor that provides us the credit memo. And so with that being said, it's been created. Our next process is we'll need to release the debit adjustment. So in this case, from this debit adjustment, you'll select remove hold. See the status changes from on hold to balance. Let's go ahead and release it and select release. And so at this point, it's been the debit adjustment has been created. It has been officially released and can be used against an AP bill. Before we move on, let's take a look at the effects on the general ledger batch that was created once we released the credit memo. So under financial tab, the link to general ledger, I'll take a look at the batch number and let's see the effects. And there we have it. All right. The reduction to accounts payable, because we talked about that, right? By creating the credit memo or the debit adjustment, it then reduces our liability, and in this case, it did, and it increased our supplies. So let's go ahead, or the value of our supplies. So let's close this out. Okay, and so it's just from the details tab. And so in this case, we just talked about, we went through the process of creating the debit adjustment, in which we did. We then released the debit adjustment and took a look at the impact on the general ledger by releasing the debit adjustment. And so in this case, we want to then apply this debit adjustment to a bill for this customer. So from the toolbar here, you'll have the bill and adjustments open. From the toolbar here, you'll select apply. The system then opens the checks and payments form. You check the type, of course. This is a debit adjustment. It then selects the reference number that's tied to the original debit adjustment that we created. We take a look at the application date. Here, everything is correct. We see the amount. And then we'll come down to the document supply tab of the form. Let's add a row. And within the row, you can see here, we can select what we'd like to apply, and this too. So you can apply it to a different credit adjustment in the case that, well, we won't talk about that. Because we'll talk later about credit adjustment. We'll just continue here. So the document type in this case will be bill. We'll come over here. If you have the reference number from the AP bill that you want to apply it and you already know it, you can type it in. If not, from the search bar here we have it, open invoices. And so in this case, we'll select this. And there you have it. So now you see by system, the system defaults how much you want to be paid. You can change this. If you wanted to just, apply $5 or whatever, or half of whatever amount, but in this case, we'll apply the entire amount. Save it, release, and there you have it. System processed it, processed the debit adjustment against the invoice, the open bill. Let's go ahead and take a look at debit adjustment and see how it was applied. And so there you have it. Let's take a look at, once again, the journal transactions form. Let's go back into payables. Oh, I'm sorry, I kind of went off there. I was just looking at something, preparing for the next portion of the slide. But we'll come back to the payables workspace, and let's just kind of, before we move on, apologize for that. Let's take a look at where we are. So what did we just go over? Went over we created and released a debit adjustment. We created a debit adjustment to reduce the outstanding balance of an AP bill, of an AP bill. And in this case, we showed that we released the debit adjustment and we applied it to a bill whose balance had to be reduced. So in that case, we applied it to $100 bill, um, that reduced it by $10. Let's continue on. So the next process we'll talk about will be processing prepayments. Oh, you know what? I'll spin back because we only went over the debit adjustment, and the next processes we'll talk about is processing a credit adjustment. So let's continue to move forward. Let's go back to Acumatica, Payables Workspace. Before we jump or dive in, the scenario is on today, which is for February 13th, we received a debit memo of $20 from Wingman Printing, one of our vendors, and the company charged us $20 for late payment of a bill. So we need to go ahead and process the vendor's debit memo as a credit adjustment that then increases the balance owed to this vendor. Okay. So first thing from the payables workspace, we'll opening the bill and adjustments form. So let's select a new bill and adjustment form. And under type, we'll select credit adjustment. And in this case, we make sure date is correct. And say debit adjustment. And our description, debit adjustment. And the vendor, in this case, Wingman, Renico, there we go. Okay, and so we have the summary area populated. This is a credit adjustment. Oh, I put debit adjustment. Excuse me. Debit memo. Use debit memo received. Oh my goodness. Debit memo received. Late payment. Okay. Getting it together. And so then we'll come down to the details tab. We'll add a row. And we're going to use transaction ID description as the transaction description. So this is a debit memo received for a late payment. Extension cost is going to be $20. We'll keep this account for other expenses. System automatically defaults that account. So let's go ahead and use it. Project code is X. This is a non-project item. And so there we have our summary area set up, details tab in the line set up. And so at this point, we'll save it. And so we have created a billing adjustment for a bill for late payment to our vendor, Wingman Printing Company. It was for $20, and we'll have everything set up. And so the next portion is we'll have to release the debit adjustment so we then can have the opportunity to pay it. So from the toolbar, we'll select remove hold. Our status goes from on hold to balanced. And at that point, we'll select release. And there you have it. We've created credit adjustment, which is basically a debit memo from your vendor. But in Acumatic for us, of course, it's a credit adjustment. And so let's take a look at the effects on our general ledger. So under Financials tab, batch number, let's take a look at the journal transactions form. And so there we have it, the effects to the accounts payable sub ledger. And you take a look at the increase in our accounts payable. And there you have it for the debit memo and the effects of the other expenses accounts. Let's go ahead and close the journal transactions form out. And there you have it. Pretty straightforward, pretty quick and easy, but we did just go over. Yeah, let's just continue here. We created the credit adjustment and to record the additional charge that the company had to pay to a vendor, which was the $20 for the late fee. And then we released that credit adjustment, and then we review the general ledger transaction generated by the system. So continuing to move, our next topic we'll cover will be the next topic we will cover will be processing prepayments. Okay, so let's jump back into Acumatica. Payables workspace, create a bill and adjustments form. So we'll create a new bill and adjustments form. And in this case, the type of this bill and adjustment will be a prepayment. Okay. And before we move forward, I just wanted to let's talk about the scenario here. Um, you want to sometimes you create prepayments in the cases where your vendor they need to or they want a payment prior to the work getting started. So how can you do that in Acumatica? And so that's what we're going through here. And so the scenario in this case is we have a vendor, which is Wingman Printing, and they're going to print some labels and different things for us. And they've requested an advance payment of $799. Okay, so we're going to create the prepayment for that amount. Okay, and so now let's just jump in. So from the payables tab, we open a new bill and adjustment form. Under type, we select prepayment. We make sure the date is correct. And let's go ahead and prepayment for labels. And let's select our vendor, in this case, Wingman. Wingman. There we have it. So we have our summary area set up. Let's go ahead and add a row. Transaction description will be prepayment for labels. The extended cost is $799. And in this case, we don't want our account to be other expenses. This is going to be for advertising expenses. And this is a non-project code, not connected to any project. And so there you have it. We have our prepayment set up. So basically summary area, line area, showing the totals are the account that will be affected. And so at this point, we'll save. And so we want to then, so we've now created the prepayment. We have it all set up. And so, scenario sometime in the future, we want to send the check or same day, of course, you want to create a check to pay for the prepayment request, right? Of course, you need to create the check to send off. So we'll remove hold. Status, of course, changes from on hold to balanced. So at this point, we'll then release. So now we're in the status to go ahead and pay. So we'll select pay and apply. So when we select that, the system check opens the checks and payments form. We take a look at the summary area to make sure everything is correct. And so in this case, the type is check. We review the cash account. This is the correct account. But once again, if this was not, you have the selection of other available accounts that you can select. Okay. Make sure the payment amount is correct. In this case, if it was not, we would change it. Um, okay. And then we come down, take a look at the document supply row. We can take a look at the reference number, which let's just go ahead. That takes us back to the original bills and adjustments that we created. We look at the amount to be paid. And of course, if we wanted to change that, we could. Okay. Scroll through. And so at this point, we know that everything is correct. Let's remove the hold. We'll select print and process. Now the system takes us to the process payments and print checks form. Here we get to, again, review the amount of the check. The other information, the reference number, of course, takes us back to the checks and payments form. And then let's just go ahead and close this. So this is exactly, so we reviewed everything and it's exactly what we want. So we select process. System will then give us the check form remittance to take a look at what the check will look like. We can review it. There we have it. That then takes us to the release payments form where we're able to view our checks. System automatically selects the check that we're working with. Of course, reference number will take us back to the previous screen and we can continue to dig back if we'd like. If this was sometime in the future and we wanted to look at the items of the previous forms that were created in succession, we can do that through this reference number. But we'll select process. Process and dialog box showed us that everything processed correctly. Let's go ahead and close this out. And so that we went through the process of creating the check to pay for our prepayment request. And so now let's go ahead and apply that prepayment to the bill. So sometime in the future, we want to apply that prepayment to the bill. So you would come back, of course, payables workspace under transactions, checks and payments. And although we see it there, our prepayment, if we wanted to filter down by, and this was full of checks and all kind of other things we wanted to filter down to quickly find this, we can simply come to our filter settings. You'll add a row. We want to search by property type. And we want the condition, the property type to equal this value. And in this case will be prepayment. And we'll click apply. And there you have all the prepayments we've ever created. And so in this case, this is the open one for $7.99 we created. And so we'll go ahead and select it. And let's go down to the documents to apply sections. We'll add a row. And the document type is going to be a bill. If you know the reference number, you can type it or you can search box. And there's the open bill we want to pay. So we'll select this one. System applies the automatic amount prepayment for $799. This is the amount that will be paid. And so at this point, you know, if you're going to release it, of course, release it. But if you wanted to save it for later, you know, you can save it, then come back. But in this case, we showed the save, so we came back. Let's go ahead and release it. And there we have it. So system processes. And let's go ahead and take a look at the financial tab. And there's no financial tab. There's no financial transaction that happened in the general ledger. Right. There was no need to. So just wanted to show that. And so let's just continue on. And we went over processing prepayment. So here we created and released a prepayment request to make a prepayment to a vendor. We then created a check to pay the prepayment request created earlier and printed and released the check. This step then made it possible to apply the prepayment to the vendor's bill. And we apply the prepayment to the vendor's bill and then release the application of the application of the prepayment to the vendor's bill. And so let's just continue moving into the final portion of this demonstration, and that will be the second portion of processing prepayments. And in this case, we'll be entering a vendor refund for a prepayment that we initially made. So with that being said, let's jump back to Acumatica. So the scenario is on the 31st of January, we received $25 refund from one of our vendors, CompuLink, for the unused amount of a prepayment that we made to them for services. So in order to process that refund, we will start from the payables workspace. Under transactions, we go to checks and payments, and we're going to select to create a new check and payments form. So we'll add a record, and under this type will be vendor refund. And in this case, we'll select, before we select the vendor, let's just put in our reference number, vendor refund, and CompuLink. Here we have it. Okay, and in the description, we'll call this vendor refund received. The payment amount we select in the summary area will be $25. That's what we received. So we tab through, select tab, and here you see the Acumatica adds a line to the documents to apply area. In this case, we come down and it automatically selects here in the line will be a debit adjustment. That's not what we're looking for. We want to apply this to a prepayment. We'll then, of course, go to reference number. If you know the reference number, you can type it or you can then search it here. Here is the $190 prepayment that we made that we're receiving a refund for. We select it. The system populates the line, the amount to be paid. And of course, if we wanted to, we've applied the entire amount. If we didn't, we can make a change. We can apply, so on a different amount if our amounts were different. And so at that point, we select save. And so here we've created the vendor refund that we can then apply and then applied it to our prepayment that we received, that we sent to this customer. And they sent us a $25 refund because the services did not equal $190. So in this case, we'll remove the hold. And so we've just created it and you see it still has the on hold status. So in this case, we'll remove the hold and it now has the balance status. Let's go ahead and click release. And so we now released it. And we can go to the application history and you'll see what we just did here, a $25 prepayment that was applied to it. Let's take a look at the general ledger transaction. So there you see the $25 refund we received. So our cash account was increased by 25 bucks. In this account, vendor refund received. You see the other side of that transaction. So we have it. Okay, so there we have it. And let's just, of course, continue. Talk about what we just finished. So through that process, we went over processing payments, prepayments for a vendor refund that we received. We went over the creation of a vendor refund for the unused amount of a prepayment. In this case, it was $25. We then reduced the balance of the prepayment. So in that case, we reduced the amount from 190 to $165. We then released the vendor refund and applied it to the original amount. So once we did that, we took a look at the effects on the applications history tab to see the transaction history, which was the $25 applied to it. And we also took a look at the general ledger transaction that was created. Okay, so we pretty much come to the end of our demonstration. And so just wanted to recap over the entire demonstration, some of the things that we covered today. And some of the things we covered, first we covered how to create a vendor. And we showed the steps on that, on how to create a vendor, including all of the important information that's necessary. We then went over the process of how to create an accounts payable bill. We then went over the process of how to release the AP bill. And then we went over how to review the general ledger batch that the system generated as a result of every transaction that we did that affected the general ledger. We went over how to pay AP bills manually, how to create them manually, or how to pay multiple bills at the same time and create separate checks if need be for vendors that like to pay separately. We then took a look at how to correct AP bills that are in the system, whether that be by creating a debit adjustment, which is a credit memo that we would give to our customer, or a credit adjustment for us that would be a debit memo that was received from one of our vendors. And then we finally close this demonstration with how to process prepayments. And so we took a look at how to do that from two different vantage points. One was how to process prepayments in a standard way for for a prepayment that was requested by a vendor. And then secondly, we went over how to process a prepayment, which was a refund, which was a $25 refund from CopyLink for a prepayment that we had previously made. Okay. So with that being said, we've come to the end of our demonstration. I appreciated your time. Thank you for listening. And my name is Abdul McWhorter. I work as a consultant with GRF CPAs and advisors. Thank you. Have a nice day.